Now, Ms. Mabasa, thank you very much for your time. You've heard that intro and it encapsulates what you wrote in February this year. I would like for you to explain to us what you mean when you say that we should look at land not as a commodity, but rather as an instrument that can afford people dignity. And as you explain that, how would it apply to the situation that's unfolding in Cape Town right now?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Xoli. I think the issue of land in South Africa has been with us since pre-colonial times. It has also survived the post-democratic government as an issue that remains unresolved. It's important for us to understand that the issue of land is an issue that doesn't just talk to economics or a commodity, as you've said in the intro. It's important to understand that land is needed for its multiple purposes, but essentially it is needed for land justice. That most of the socio-economic issues that the country is faced with are centered around the fact that people, the issues of poverty, inequality, as you know, but the landlessness issue and the no access to economic activities, the fact that we still sit with the majority of the population living in the peripheral areas and far away from economic opportunities, the fact that the average South African that does have employment spends more than 65% of their salaries on transport in order to access economic activities is a big issue. When we talk about land justice, we need to unpack that into its multiple meanings. The meaning of land is also has to do with intangible meanings. It's got to do with people's ability to find themselves in their place as citizens in South Africa. Yeah. It has got to do with the fact that people are able to practice their traditions and culture. We have large practices in South Africa where land is attached to help people bury. We have practices in South Africa where land is attached to people's heritage, how they practice their religion, the ability to have access to those religious and cultural intangible places. Whether we're talking about people having access to rivers or hills and mountains. So the understanding that when we talk about land, it's just not a place to stay, but has a myriad of many other meanings, is quite an important issue that attaches itself to dignity and an ability to feel like a worthwhile citizen.
And while you touch on that issue, and I'm sorry to cut in here, when you touch on the issue of dignity, we saw a massive outcry in Cape Town, and it was over a naked man who was basically pulled out of his shack, and unfortunately those scenes beamed all across the country. That talks directly to the issue of dignity. Just from what you have seen, how would you say the Cape Town authorities are handling this issue of landless people?
Look, the issue of landlessness and the example that you quote is a direct example, a literal example of the violence meted against poor and landless people by those in power. And this kind of violence, and what we've seen in the naked man and the emasculation, was a literal one, but it continues every day metaphorically, where authorities or people in power will say, well, the land was reserved for development, or the land was reserved for spatial development, where the needs and the needs of poor people are pushed further and further along, further and further from priority in favor of government making decisions that are linked directly with capital, where poor people continue to be unseen and unheard.
Yeah.
In the case of the issue of evictions, we've heard that authorities have said these aren't evictions, they are rather counter land invasions, I think that's a red herring, and I think that's neither here nor there. South Africa needs to get to a point where the issue of land has to be an issue that is of a national vision, where there is got to be enforcement, where when decisions are made around making provision for land, that those decisions can be made with courage, and that they can be made with implementation capacity, so that we don't find situations where one city has a completely different strategy from another province, or one department has a different, a goal from that deviates from the national vision. It's about time, as we speak about landlessness, that decisions are made properly and they can be implemented.
Bulelwa Mabasa, let's leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much for your time. She is a member of the President's Land Reform Advisory Panel.